Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
When he's in busy drumming with Finnish rock band Stratovarius, Rolfe Pilve enjoys nothing more than casting a fly for trout, sea trout and salmon. I'll be learning about his fishing timeline along with his life as a musician. Rolf, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me this morning. Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you. It's nice to be in your podcast. Everything is good. It's been a busy summer. After COVID, it's really nice to play some shows again with my band. And we have been having some weekend festivals over to Europe this summer. And I have also had some time to fish, which is, of course, great.
That's wonderful to hear. And I love with looking at your social media that how there are shots of you playing in front of thousands of people, and then there'll suddenly be a shot of you with a sea trout or a salmon or something like that. That must be a lovely mix for you as well, mustn't it?
Yeah, I think like the fishing is perfect way to center myself after playing a huge show. So it's a good kind of balance I have with fishing and being a rock musician.
Absolutely. So for our listeners as well, can you give us an idea of where you're based and perhaps if you have a home water, if you could tell us perhaps a little bit about that as well?
So yeah, I live in Helsinki. It's a metropolitan area of Finland and my home river is a Vantaa River. And actually, I'm really lucky because it's flowing nearby. It's just like 10 minutes by car. And it's also like quite long stretch of fishing. Like there's several different spots you can go around like 60 kilometers. And it's pretty crowded nowadays, but you can still find spots if you have will to adventure at the riverbanks. It's mostly like a rainbow trout fishing. There is some local trout stock as well. There's also a good chance for a sea trout there. So that's what I'm after most of the time.
And how are you fishing for those, Rolf? Are you fishing swinging flies down and across for them?
Basically, the structure of a river is a little bit like tricky for fishing flies. Basically, like during the springtime when the water is high, that's the time when I'm swinging the flies for a sea trout. But when it's getting more to summer and the river is really low, it's actually really stony and it's more like a pocket style of fishing. So that's the time when I changed to nymphing, and also like I have this kind of big fish nymphing rig I use with just like a running line, and then I just have a leader and small streamers, and I kind of nymph and also streamer fish with that. So it's really handy for those like really small pockets.
And which do you prefer out of the two? Because that sounds a really innovative and interesting way of fishing. And pocket water is, I'm not long back from Italy and I've found some pocket water heaven there. I absolutely loved it, I have to say. But is it for you, would it be swinging flies and waiting for that line to go tight? Or do you like that nymphing approach that you've developed? Or is it a combination of both? Do you just enjoy and fish with the conditions as they present themselves?
I enjoy both. Of course, like during this time, I'm more into like swinging flies and spay casting. But of course, I want to have fish as well. So that nymphing can be really exciting as well. And I can actually kind of side fish here as well. So it's really exciting to see like big fish rising to a fly and see to take. So there is good things in both techniques, I think.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. And it's interesting that you're seeing the fish. And because I guess over here, sea trouting, we generally assume that we go out in darkness. I like catching them on dry flies myself as well and see them rising. And that's really, really good fun. But I'm guessing that daytime is predominantly where you're fishing for them. Is it? Do you ever venture out at nighttime?
I have tried it, but not with great success here. I think one of the reasons like why I prefer like basically like mornings, let's say 2 hours before sun goes down, is that the water is so murky, so the sea trouts are not that shy, and I can actually wade really close to these pockets I'm usually fishing. So that's the way I prefer it here. But we were just fishing in Lötkerive last week. There we tried like a lot of this nighttime fishing those classic necks and like slow water, but without success this time.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you say about stalking the fish. And has that taught you about presentation? Has it taught you that actually stealth is incredibly important, and you've learned that if you are stealthy enough that you can actually get, I'm guessing, pretty close to these fish if you're fishing pockets?
Yeah, it's definitely like you have to be really careful when you're wading. You don't want to turn those stones with your feet. And usually I'm using just like 2 meters of line or something like that, like super short lines. Also, the presentation is like something I learned this year with nymphing, basically, that you can try anything. Like I got really great success just like hanging the nymphs in a current and then just like bouncing them there and doing all kind of weird stuff instead of like that basically classic Huron nymphing style, casting upstream and just like dead drifting the flies. So it's been interesting and kind of a good learning experience this summer.
Yeah. And are you getting, it sounds to me as though that's something, as an angler, you like to experiment, you like to try different things. Is that sort of a scene of fishing that you actually have on your rivers, that people are fishing this way for sea trout in these ways? Or is it something that you've just been playing with? And like you say, you've taken Euronymphing a little bit and then run with it and sort of developed it to work with your own home water. Is that something you're just doing yourself, or do you sort of explore these techniques and talk with these techniques with friends as well, or you just like getting onto the river and trying them out and seeing if they work?
I would say like most of those techniques have just come by accident. Basically just like hanging the flies in the water and all of a sudden you see activity. So it's been just like experimenting and trying things without any kind of knowing what to do, actually. But the thing here in Vantaa River is that it's mostly like people are fishing for rainbow trouts, and it's a little bit different game here for rainbow trouts. So haven't really exchanged ideas with other fishermen. But I have a fishing friend here that we talk about and like experiment with all kind of weird stuff.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. It's interesting. Again, we've had a number of musicians on here, and one of my closest friends is a musician, and he's a I don't know if it runs through, if it is creative process or whatever it is, I'm not sure, but he's forever figuring little things out and adjusting bits and pieces. Do you think that is something to do with you being so creative because of your day job, that lends itself to what you're doing here and sort of playing with things a little bit and refining things the whole time? Is there part of that, or is that part of life in a studio as well, that you're, I'm guessing, I don't know it, that you're continually refining to get that perfect sound? Is there any sort of comparison there that you can detect?
Yeah, I think like both things goes pretty much hand in hand. Like I'm really fond of learning things, and experimenting with things. So I think like from experimenting with my drum kit for like last 25 years, it have kind of shaped my mind in a way that I also try to kind of implement the same attitude for my fishing. And I'm really fond of trying new things and basically refining my fishing techniques all the time, and also learning new pools and new rivers. So it's kind of, I think it's about like, I just want to learn as much as possible and being curious and questioning like my fishing tactics all the time if there's no action.
Yeah, that's good to hear, and I think that's one of the reasons. Certainly, speaking just purely for myself, that I think that's why I love this pastime that we do, because we're continually questioning, asking, trying to figure out why the fish has eaten, but also why it hasn't eaten a fly, and trying to get to the bottom of it. And that's a great attraction to me, that I find that I can't answer everything. So that makes me come back to the river time and time again. Do you find that it sounds as though that's similar for yourself, and it is never getting to the bottom of it, never being an expert or knowing all of the answers? Because I don't think we do we? Is that, I'm guessing that's part of the attraction for you as well then, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say it's actually one of the biggest attraction for fishing. Like it's very fascinating, especially with salmon and sea trout, because you never know why they take the fly. So it's always adventure and kind of a experiment when you go to a river, and
Yeah.
it's the best thing about fly fishing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. And you said that your local river, that you touched on that it can get busy with anglers. And, I'm thinking public water, let's say in the United States, sometimes people will park their car and fish where they've parked their car and don't necessarily walk so far. I can't imagine in Finland for 1 second that people just park their car and fish by the spot. They all like to walk. And that brings me nicely on to the angling scene. Although I've sort of said how I feel that they may be different, yet I think the Finnish scene is probably more akin to the American cooler look that fly fishing has, rather than that we have in the UK. Do you find that? And how do you find the demographic, the age group of people fishing? Is it mixed and varied, or is it sort of, people 20s to 40s, or how do you find that? And do you notice comparisons if you've fished in the US between that comparable, say, to the UK?
I would say like definitely the fishermen have got younger. Like I think like most of the fishermen, at least here in my local river, they are like, let's say between 20 and 40 at the moment. But of course, like in the salmon fishing, I think it's the old school guys still kind of doing it most. But I think the trout fishing is really big in Finland at the moment, and I have seen like last, let's say, 10 years that I have fished actively, it's been like growing hugely every year, and the pressure is getting higher and higher in the rivers. But at least here in my local river, it's still very possible to find like your own stretch. Like it's a good thing that they are stocking the rainbow in a certain area, so it usually attracts people there because you can get a good hookup there with the fish. The places I'm fishing here, you can fish like weeks without any sign of fish, but then you're hunting for that one fish you want to catch, so it's a little bit different game. Trout fishing have been a little bit complicated last years, because like if you want to have like a proper brown trout fishing in Finland, it's basically you have to go to central Finland, and we don't have that many rivers there, so you have to kind of book advance like 6 months or something like that, and there's lots of trout fishermen, so they are fully booked like every river. So that's probably why I have drawn towards salmon fishing and sea trout fishing, especially in Norway and Sweden.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you said that you've experienced, you've detected a growth in the amount of fly anglers. Do you think that's got something to do with lockdown and everything else that people are going out? Or do you think it's things like social media? Where do you think that growth has actually been driven from? And if it is COVID lockdown related, do you think that curve will flatten off as people get back to doing other stuff again? Where do you think that's coming from?
I think it's like a combination of both. Like COVID was clearly like affecting the amount of fishermen here, and then of course like social media, because you have so much information and like lots of hero shots, and like the fishing is like, I think it have grown quite much in a few years in social media, so that's attracting people. And also like I think the social media have kind of polished in a way how the fishing is looking. It's like cool in a way. So that's attracting especially young people nowadays to start fishing, which is of course great. I think it's like it's one of the best hobbies you can have when you're a teenager.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be fascinating to see if that growth continues through, and I sincerely hope that it will. The social media thing, like you say, the hero shots do help. I always say on here, I don't think it always tells the story of where we got caught in a tree or we stuffed a cast or we lost a fish. But I guess if it does help us encourage people into fishing, that's good from that point of view. It's interesting what you say about having a book to fish some of those rivers. And I think to a degree, Denmark is similar in some of the streams that they have there. I'm only using that because I know the Denmark scene a little bit, and I'm very much looking forward to going over in November again to go fish for sea trout. Do you fish? We've started off really talking about sea trout. Is there much of a coastal scene there where you are that people go out and catch sea trout from the coast too?
There is good possibilities. Like the coast fishing here in Helsinki area, it's kind of a tough sport, and you can go like weeks without fish. But if you get like few fish a season, it's already kind of very successful. But I would say like those sea trout maniacs go to Gotland or then like Bornholm or those Danish waters, and that's something I want to try as well at some point. So yeah, that's a state of sea trout fishing here at the moment.
Nice. And I can recommend it. If you can get to Denmark, please give it a go, because I think it's fabulous fun, and it is seeing just vast expanses of water and throwing your cast out thinking there just can't be anything here. And then all of a sudden the line goes tight and there's a fish on still. And I've been fortunate enough to be doing it a number of years now that it still blows my mind and still makes me come back for more. And I know my friend Ray, when he first told me about it, I think as a confirmed river angler, I think he felt I might not like it. And man, do I love it. I think it's fantastic fun. So hopefully you'll get to do some more of that. You've talked a little bit about salmon. Are you a spey caster? Do you enjoy that?
Yes. So I started salmon fishing in 2018. I'm still learning a lot about spey casting, but that's the first time I touched the double hander in the Mörrum River in Sweden. And that was an exciting week, seeing all those master casters there doing like perfect spey cast. And of course, like I didn't know at all how to do it. But after a trip, I got very lucky and I got to get known to this local fishing shop guy who is really good friend of mine as well. And I kind of got a really good tuition right from the start, so I got hang of it pretty quickly, and I really enjoy spay casting. It's just like I don't know if there's better feeling when you have like a perfect cast and the line is straightening up and it's a tight loop, and then the spin starts and maybe a fish bites. You never know. Usually it doesn't bite, but
I know that feeling. I know that feeling. Do you find that your work as a drummer helps you with the rhythm? And I think, years back they used to talk about the waltz rhythm for a single spay. Do you find that, and using sort of, I'm thinking, different movements between your hands and your feet, did that make spay casting to you feel easier to coordinate all of those movements that are required?
yeah, I think it definitely helps. And I think the biggest thing, like when practicing playing drums, is that you have to be very aware what you're doing with your body. So I think actually that's the biggest strength I had when learning spay casting, just being aware like how my body is moving and tweaking small things to try to have the perfect spay cast happening. So definitely just the awareness of my body. I don't know about the rhythm like how much that affects the casting really, but yeah, awareness. That's an important thing in music and fishing as well.
And I'm thinking of my friend Perry again, actually, and what he said to me about practicing. And so I'm sort of talking about it in the context of spay casting, but I guess it's the same with music as well. And said, if you put down a guitar and then pick it up the next day, it's familiar. And then the longer the gap between putting it down and picking it up, then the harder it gets to get back into that flow, or it takes a little bit more time to get back into that flow. Do you find that with spay casting, that the practice that you practiced a lot? Because I know, you're obviously at the top of your profession musically, and so that doesn't come with a lot of dedication and a lot of practice. And is that something you have applied with the spay casting when you learnt that you realised that actually what I put into this, I'll get back from it?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think like that summer 2018, I was casting for like maybe 2-3 times a week, just trying to keep it consistent and really get hold on that, because I of course I want to focus on fishing when I'm actually on the river fishing for salmon or sea trout. So yeah, it was kind of a practice regimen for a while, but nowadays I'm fishing pretty much. So if I'm like having few trips a year, fishing for week at a time, that kind of keeps up my casting pretty well, and I can get back to it like after like long winter. It's just like 5 minutes and the casts are happening again pretty well.
Yeah. And do you think that's muscle memory as well? And muscle memory plays a part in that. And I guess, again, coming back to your day job as well, that you get into that relatively quickly. And like you say, if you're doing it regularly, that muscle memory comes in. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, it's definitely muscle memory thing. And just like lots of repetition, sleep between the repetition and more repetition. And ideally perfect repetition. So that's the way to learn all the things like that you do with the body.
Yeah, there's some good points. And I often talk on here that, I can cast a little bit and I still practice. And we've gone through a long spell of not fishing. I've been lucky enough, as I've said, to be away. So I was able to do that. And then I got on the chalk streams before it got super hot and the water was cool. So, I selected and caught a few fish, which was great. But in the interim in between, even then, and it was similar with lockdown, that I was making sure that I was practicing my casting a little bit so that when I did hit the river, that I was in pretty good shape and felt comfortable and confident. And I think when you are, then when that cast, and I always say to people, if I can cover that fish in the first or second cast, I've got a pretty good chance, I think, if I've done everything right, of catching it. And so that's a really big part of it for me. So I always think that the practice is really, really important and does help and makes things a little bit easier. But the other thing I wanted to ask you, and you alluded to the fact, and I'm the same, I've come to terms that I'm probably not going to catch salmon this year. But do you remember that when you were casting that double hander, the line went out? Do you remember when it went tight and that feeling? I'm sure I know the answer to this, but that's pretty special, isn't it?
Yeah. I still remember it was 2018 in Maroon, the same trip that I started. And basically we have been fishing for like one day, and the second day at the evening we were on a upper river pools. And usually you don't get any salmon there during that time, like early May. But we were just like practicing and just like taking it easy, and it was a little bit stressful to fish those lower beats because everybody was so professional there. So we wanted to have our own privacy. So we were fishing there, and I actually hooked a huge fish, short cast, and I think it was like the line was kind of just going freely, but the fly was going really fast, so I think it triggered the fish. And the salmon took the fly, and it was super heavy. It was on for like 10 seconds, and then the line broke down. So it was a good way to start. And if you have been fishing Maroon River in May, it's like, even if you are fishing the best pools, it's very tough to get fish from there. So I got really lucky during that day, even though I lost the fish.
I'm often, when that line does go and you feel it pull away from you, I almost feel as though the fish has really chosen me rather than the other way around. And that moment, as I said, I'm not sure whether it'll happen this year. I don't know. I don't care. But I almost feel that. And I often talk about that connection between the fish and, if we're lucky enough to land it, that there's that brief connection, isn't there, with the fish that has travelled so far and has come home again, and you're lucky enough to have that moment of connection with it. Do you feel likewise?
Yeah, I think it's a very intimate moment when you actually hook the fish, and of course the relief and the feeling when the line tightens up after like weeks of casting and not feeling anything. So it's the best feeling in the world, I think.
Yeah. I think you're dead right. We're talking about the sort of fishing. We've talked about your introduction into salmon and how you're fishing for sea trout, which is, I think, really, really interesting. But where did your fishing career actually begin? Was it a traditional one that you fished with family members and then progressed and picked up a fly rod? What route did that career take for you?
So my father was like a keen fisherman when I was a kid. He was mostly doing like spin fishing, but also some fly fishing. And of course, I got really interested in fishing as well at a very young age. And we were fishing for pike and perch and just like getting used to spin fishing equipment. And we fished during the summers. And I think I was maybe like 10, 11 when I first time tried fly fishing. But the times were a little bit different. Like you didn't have any information in the internet back in the days, so it was really, really hard to hook any fish. But I kept on trying like a few years. And I hooked some fishes there and there, but then the music started, so I had like a long break from the fishing. But my dad is like the reason I'm a fisherman. He was also going into Norway fishing for 1 week when I was a kid. So that's how I got heard about the salmon as well. But I wasn't really interested back in the days about salmon fishing. But I think the circle is kind of closing down, and now we are going to fish salmon with my father every summer.
That's a really cool story, and I really like that. And it got me thinking about what we were talking about previously as well, that you said there were no information, and it was similar for myself and many other people listening to this, that you either read a magazine, you bought the book, and that was it. And then videos started to appear. Do you think that is why, also one of the reasons, I know we've touched on the sort of person you are and how you like to figure through problems and address them, but do you think that's because many of us come from a time when information wasn't easy to get hold of, so as a result you had to figure stuff out yourself, whereas now you can just post something on Facebook, you can put something on Instagram, whatever it is, and you will get that information pretty damn quickly? Do you think that's the difference from then until now? Do you think that's one of the things that helped form you as an angler as well?
I think I was maybe a little bit too young back in the days. Like I wasn't really like analyzing what I was doing. But when I started again, I of course like was watching YouTube all the time and like just sucking all info into my system, and then going to a river and trying different things. Pretty quickly, I also saw really good success, especially with like nymphing techniques, and especially like this French type of nymphing, only with the leader and like indicators and that kind of stuff. And internet was like a big deal of knowing about that technique, and also rigging it and like getting a proper equipment for that. So that's how I got back to the fishing. But I don't know if I was fishing all this time. Like still, like I think that the internet time would have affected, and I would have found the same information, maybe even in the same time. Like I think like last 12 years or something like that, the internet have really exploded with all the blogs and YouTube and videos and how to fish different techniques. So it really helps, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about a gap between where the music career was starting to take off and you fishing and then not fishing. How long was that gap between you fishing, not fishing, and then picking it up again? And what was it that made you start fishing again? And did you miss it?
So basically, I had like 10 years of no fishing in between. So I started to be really serious about drumming when I was like 13, 14. But then I moved into Helsinki back in 2010 and found out that I have a good river nearby. And I didn't really have like any hobbies. And I was thinking like, oh, fishing would be nice. And I might try like with my old fly rod and just see how it goes. And it was really fun, of course, and I got kind of hooked pretty quickly. And then came the urinating times, and then I was like obsessed about fly fishing after that. So, but I would say like it would be nice that I fished like all those missed years between, especially like for trout, because it wasn't that much pressure on the trout streams during that times. But during the last 10 years, fishing for trout have got like very popular in Finland.
Yeah. And do you think you've mentioned about the nymphing? Is that the preferred technique for catching trout in Finland, or will you take them off the surface as well with dry flies?
I think it's kind of. I think we use like lots of different techniques. Like many people prefer like streamer fishing during like the early season, high water season, and that's also the preferred method of mine. So I think that's the most fun and also most flexible when fishing for trout. But then, like when the water is getting warmer and there's more insects, we change to nymphing. And then if you see a hatch, then you can try fly as well. But the waters are quite murky here, so I think dry fly fishing is mostly for those special times. You have to have like active fish or hatch going on. Otherwise, it's usually like the most efficient to go with like euro nymphing.
Yeah, I know my friend Johannes actually, who's from Finland and writes for the magazine and came out to Italy. And I think on the podcast we did in Italy that we sort of were fishing an alpine lake. And I know he's a very keen streamer angler. And we sort of talked ourselves into fishing the alpine lake with some streamers. And then I'd see him wander off somewhere and he's throwing a streamer somewhere or other. And I know he really enjoys that as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your career path as well and breaking into the music industry. I'm guessing is, you're clearly dedicated. You worked incredibly hard at your trade. Is it difficult to actually break into? Did you find that path to where you are now a difficult one? And were there times where you thought, where you questioned whether you'd gone the right way, or was there always a belief that you would find that path to where you find yourself today?
First of all, I think like I was lucky to start out when there wasn't social media around. So basically my career had been like going forward like pretty naturally. And basically when I got serious, I got involved in bands that had like all the players were like 10 years or more older than me. And it went from there, like just going from band to band and getting known the scene, so to speak. So all my work have gone from like basically just like knowing somebody, just playing very good and being prepared. But I don't know nowadays, like if I was like a teenager now and thinking about music career, it would be pretty tough because you have to have like a social media appearance, and like it's lots about making like good content, and the time that it takes, it's away from like concentrating on actual playing and practicing. That's the most important thing, I think. So I think it's very tough nowadays. And also the competition is a little bit different. Like when I was younger, I was usually just like competing in the local scene. But nowadays, like it's more like a global thing.
Yeah.
And there's so many great players in the social media. So it's really hard to kind of find your own way of doing it.
That's a really interesting point that you make, because I, from what I gather, looking into your industry at the level that yourself is at, that people within bands will recommend people. And it's very like a fishing guide in some respects, of a word of mouth being one of the best ways to hire a fishing guide. If someone says that, I know this is at a slightly different level, but somebody says, well, Rolf's a great drummer's looking for a band, and then it sort of feeds itself that way. And like you say, and really interestingly say about how social media now, because I guess how it used to work, that a band would build a following by playing in locations, pubs, clubs, whatever it may be, whereas now you've got a big environment that you can actually reach, but therefore, like you say, it's a lot harder because it's more competitive. And I guess there's less of that goes on where somebody says, well, they're a really good drummer, because people can see on social media, and I'm sure you see lots of stuff of people drumming or bass playing or keyboard, whatever that may be, but it's whether they fit within that group as well. Whereas I guess when it's a recommendation from somebody who knows a band, it's a whole lot easier for that to fit in, isn't it? That, like you say, you hit that really succinctly and interestingly, and it must be a completely different industry from the one that you first joined.
Yeah, things have changed a lot. Like, I think still like the connections are everything. Even nowadays, like even if you're starting out, you have to go out there and just play shows and like know right people. And then when you do it for 10 years, you might get lucky, and then you get a phone call from a big band and you get the audition. And if you're prepared, then you have practiced your ass off for many years, you might get lucky. But there's always like this luck in everything, I think. And also like in music business, of course, like in every business, like you also have to be like the right guy. So you have to be like punctual and the nice guy to hang around. Otherwise, it's like you won't get far.
Yeah. And what are those auditions like when, say, for your current band Stratovarius, when you had the audition there? What is that like, and how did you feel when you were sitting there playing with them? Was that a nervous moment? Did you feel, how does that work? And when they contacted you, do you sort of rehearse with them just to see how was it, and how did you find that process?
So basically, like I got contacted in Facebook. They had like this audition thing going on, and I never really actually thought about applying for the band because I was more interested at the time from jazz music and like pop music and like kind of thinking myself as a freelance drummer, playing all kind of different styles and that kind of stuff. But I got contacted then to basically audition was like that I had to learn 4 songs, and then we just gathered together in the studio and we played through those 4 songs, and they recorded everything. And of course, like we were talking a lot because they want to know what kind of person you actually are. But I remember reading from this magazine, Modern Drummer, like 10 years before this audition, about the drummer who were playing Korn, that he actually learned the whole set list and went to the audition even though it wasn't required. So I also checked the latest set lists from the internet, and I actually learned like maybe 10 songs in total. And I was saying like, if you want to play some other songs, we can do that as well. So I think that was at least the sign that I have a good working attitude, so to speak. So we played, I think, 8 songs in total in audition. And then it was like months of knowing anything, not hearing about the guys. And then the phone call came that if I would be still interested in joining in. And that's the start of my career in Stratovarius. And during the audition, I don't think like it was really a nerve-wracking experience. Like I was really prepared, and that's usually like the thing that helps with being nervous about playing with people. If you just know the material, you have done your best and worked your ass off, like there's no reason to basically be nervous. So yeah, it's all about working hard, preparing.
Yeah. I think that's such a great story, and learning the 8 songs, I think that must be the difference between one level and that whole different level. And I'm sure things like that must have had a huge impact. And it must have been strange. And having done my, looking on things like Spotify, your band has had tens and tens of millions of downloads. I don't know how I'd have felt having to sit and audition like that. And that I guess adrenaline plays a part in it. But like you say, I guess as well, being prepared means that when they asked you to play the song, that must have been relatively not straightforward, but relatively comfortable to do. Was that the case when you started that first song, that everything sort of slotted into place nicely for you? And you were happy with how it started and clearly how it finished?
Yeah, I think it was pretty relaxed situation after all.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. Now, tell me, is touring as exhausting as it sounds? And I've asked musicians as well, if you are touring, do you try and seek out some fishing on a particular tour? And have you done that?
There's not really that much time to fish, unfortunately, during the touring, because we are traveling all the time and changing countries every day. So it's basically just spending time in the bus. But otherwise, I don't see touring that much exhausting thing. Usually it's quite stable environment, every day is pretty much the same. You always have good food, catering there, so it's in a way kind of easy life. But of course, if you get into all kind of substance abuse and that kind of stuff, it can be a train wreck. But I like to do lots of sports during the days and just getting prepared for the show and just relaxing. I like touring a lot. It's really nice.
And so as a result of that, did you miss it when we had the COVID restrictions? Was that not a difficult time, but did that make you, did it make you miss your job immensely because of that and not being able to tour?
Definitely. When the COVID thing started, it was just a few months before the festival season, and we actually would have had the most busy festival season ever. So it was big hit when the lockdown started and everything was cancelled or postponed and not knowing what's happening. But it took maybe few weeks of reflecting my life and getting used to this new normal. And after that, I think the COVID time luckily was pretty smooth for myself. And one of the reasons was that I was still playing and practicing every day and basically just getting ready when the show starts. And I was also really busy teaching drums during the whole COVID time. So the teaching practice was also kind of the saving thing there. So I was really busy nice. All the time. And then we also did a new album, Stratovarius, in 2021. It's actually going to be released in a month. So it was a good project, just preparing for that and practicing that. And in a way, COVID time was kind of a good learning experience. Of course, I was missing shows, but after a while, I kind of got used to staying home at weekends and enjoying also some downtime and actually seeing my girlfriend as well, and just having a normal kind of 9-to-5 life for a while. But now that the COVID is kind of a history, hopefully, you never know, but at least now it seems like that. It's now I kind of notice how much I have missed playing shows and actually hanging around with guys and just traveling and playing different places.
Yeah, I saw a concert, a band called Elbow, who I like very much, and we happened to be, it was a stand-up gig, and it was the first date of their tour after restrictions lifted, and you could see, standing so close, how emotional they were playing in front of, being able to play their music in front of people. It was quite noticeable, and it was very moving to see what it meant to them to be able to do that. Do you remember when you sat behind the drums in a live situation for the first time post lockdown, and how did that feel to you?
It was fantastic and scary in a way. Like, I remember it was last December, we had our first show, like after lockdowns with Stratovarius. And weeks prior to that show, I was just like thinking that, can I actually pull it off anymore? Like getting back to a big stage, and like it was pretty stressful. But when the show started, it was like a moving moment for me, and it was kind of a good. I'm thinking about the right word for that, but it was a touching moment, and it felt like that there haven't been like 2 years break from the shows. It felt like home on the stage.
Yeah, I love that. It's made me emotional thinking about it, because I saw how emotional they were talking about it, and it was just wonderful to be a part of that moment. And they knocked it out of the park that night. They really did. They were absolutely fantastic. What is the best thing about playing live?
I think it's connecting with the audience. Like, if you somehow can get the audience like react, and if the audience is really wild, you get so much energy out of that experience that it's definitely the best part of playing live. But of course, like nowadays, I'm also kind of chasing for like this perfect show, like playing wise. So it's always a challenge. Like, I have usually after every show, I have some parts of the songs or something like that. I try to play better, and it's kind of chasing that better show all the time. So that's also kind of the thing that keeps it very interesting.
And I've seen some, you say, sort of festival season. Have you been busy with that? Have you got concerts coming up soon?
Yeah, so basically this summer, I think we have played like 12 shows so far. Now we are heading to Germany next weekend. Then we have a small break, but I'm playing some like top 40 gigs in between in September, and some drumline stuff as well. And then in October, we are getting back to the festivals with Stratovarius. And then we have a Finnish tour coming up in late November for 3 weeks. And maybe next year we are having a European tour, and also the South American tour is already booked. So it's looking very promising.
Fantastic. So it sounds like it's going to be a busy one. And so it sounds as though you need to pack in as much fishing as you possibly can beforehand. I know you're just back from a trip with your dad. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so basically we had time of our lives. I think this was actually our best trip so far. So we were fishing in Lökte River in Sweden for sea trout. And it's such a nice river. It was our first time there, so we were exploring a lot and just trying to find like all the good places there and fish lots of different pools. But it's like middle of nowhere, and we were really lucky also that there wasn't that much pressure. It felt like private fishing most of the time, and lots of challenging pools. So basically it was a little bit like the same kind of pocket fishing I do here, but with the double hander and floating lines and tiny flies. But yeah, it was really amazing trip. Also the lodge that we were staying, it was like such a nice place, lots of farm animals, and also the feeling was really good. And we also met some really nice fishermen there. And that's actually like when we are traveling, and especially in Sweden, we have got to know like lots of people, and just connecting with like other fishermen. I think that's really, really nice. You get like lifelong friends in the banks of the river.
Yeah. And when you're at places like, it fascinates me, and I think I asked my friend Steve Kemp, who's drummer in a band called Hardfire, and I said, do you ever sort of, will you be in a situation where somebody says to you in a lodge, do I recognize you? Or they ask you what you do, and they suddenly, do you ever get those sorts of moments? And are they interesting ones for you to handle, or do you just say you're a musician? How does that sort of work for you in those sort of situations?
So far, nobody have recognized me, but I think it's because we are still playing kind of small marginal music. But usually people are quite curious when I say like that I'm a drummer, and then they usually check to YouTube, and we have got some new fans from there as well. So it's been good for record sales as well. So
that sounds like, you're justifying your fishing trip by the sound of it.
Yeah, indeed. But otherwise, like what we are talking about, it's usually just like fishing, of course, and changing tactics and telling about good hole somewhere, like in the river, and changing information.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're all fishermen at the end of the day, aren't we? And fisher folk, and we all want to share information and help each other. Do you have, I guess, do you have a dream destination? Is there somewhere that you would either like to swing a fly for salmon, catch a sea trout or a trout? Have you got, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2 destinations that you can choose. Are there 2 places that you would love to visit and go cast a fly?
Lately, I have got fascinated about British Columbia. So, like steelhead fishing and king salmons, and those sceneries, like they are drawing me a lot. So that would be on my bucket list. And then, of course, like sea trout fishing in Argentina is also one location I would really like to fish at some point. And actually, I'm kind of planning that when we are going to South America to play, that I could kind of combine these 2 things somehow, maybe before the tour or after the tour, being on the same side of the globe. But those are two destinations that I would really like to visit at some point.
I think they're really good choices as well. And if you don't mind not catching anything, you could change king salmon for steelhead and make it even harder. And they are just an awesome fish. And I think getting to know you via this conversation, I think you'd dig them. They are such a cool fish. And they're fantastic. Actually, we've got a piece about British Columbia and steelhead in the upcoming edition of Fly Culture, and to whet the appetite a little bit. But they are a super, super cool fish. And like you say, South America, and I was immediately, when you said that and you said where your tour schedule, I was immediately thinking, oh yeah, that might kind of work. That just sounds an amazing destination. It's never been somewhere that I've thought of fishing yet. It's suddenly somewhere I'm thinking more and more about. I think it's the logistics of getting there is one of the things that puts me off a little bit. But I guess to get to these pristine waters, you've got to put in the long miles, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it takes basically like 1 day to get there from Finland. And of course, like flying is very expensive nowadays. And then combined with like the actual price of fishing in Argentina, so it's going to take like a long time to save some money for that kind of trip. But like once in a lifetime kind of experience, that would be like pretty amazing.
Yeah. And has saltwater done anything for you? Does that interest you, bonefish or permit or tarpon? Does that interest you at all?
Yeah, it's something like that's also kind of growing on me. And I actually have a friend, Jussi Sjölund, who actually used to do like lots of fishing movies back in the days, like from salmon fishing and stuff like that. So he's staying in Florida every year for like 3 months on an island, and he have like a cheap accommodation there. So he's been trying to lure me to come there for like 2 weeks. So that's something I'm definitely going to do at some point.
Yeah, I can recommend it.
It's actually a funny story about Jussi. Like, I got to know him when we were fishing Byske in 2019. We were staying in the same cabin there, not knowing each other before, and we started to talk. And I remember seeing this Gaula Silver movie back in like when I was 10, and he was actually a director, and like he did the movie, so it was kind of also a circle closing in there. But that's the best thing about connecting with fishermen. Like all of a sudden you have this kind of huge pool of friends and all these connections, and everybody is basically knowing each other from different situations.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing. And I'm sure the music industry in some respects is similar, that it is really, when you get into it, small. And I think fishing is the same. It's filled with so many good people as well, isn't it? And as we've alluded to, so many people want to help as well. And I think that's one of the great things about it. And sort of rounding this circle off nicely then, the time you spent with your dad, the person who sort of really brought you into this, it must have been cool to just come back from this trip with him, and it's another tiny little circle that's connected again, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. He's the best fishing buddy I could have. Like, it's just like when we are on the river, it's so much fun, lots of laughs and bad humor, and we kind of like to fish a little bit different water as well. So we always kind of find our own pools, and we have our own ways of fishing. So it's a good combo every time.
Yeah, fantastic. Rolf, it's been absolutely fantastic talking with you. We've talked for over an hour now, and I've really, really enjoyed it, getting a sense of you as a person, as an angler, and obviously your musical career has been fascinating as well. How, if people want to listen to the music or find you, how can they connect with you? What are your social media handles if they want to find you?
So you can basically find me from Instagram and Facebook, but I'm more active in Instagram. And of course you can check our band socials in Instagram, and then just go Spotify and try out some of those songs. Maybe they are your cup of tea.
Absolutely. So that will be Rolfe Pilve, Pilve. So look for him on Instagram. And as I said, there's some amazing sort of behind the scenes, which always interests me, of being in a band and shots of the band looking back at each other with the crowd behind them. I love all that sort of stuff, yet interspersed with fishing shots as well. And there's some awesome sea trout shots that I saw came out, I think it was yesterday or this morning as well, that I really enjoyed looking at. So, Rolf, it's been absolutely fantastic catching up with you. It's been fantastic talking with you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. As ever, there will be one every single week. And if you're enjoying them, perhaps you'll consider liking them on Apple Podcasts and places like that. As I said, I'm not interested in sponsorship. I'm not interested in stuff like that. But I'm told also if you do rate it, that people can find us, and that would be really cool. So I'd greatly appreciate that. But thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. There'll be another one very, very soon.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.